All right, let's dive right in. We're jumping back to the 1990s to unpack the story of China's first and honestly pretty disastrous attempt to build its own semiconductor industry. It's this incredible high-stakes story of massive ambition, spectacular failure, and some really, really hard-won lessons that, ended up shaping everything that came after.
So let me ask you this. How do you even begin to catch a target that's moving at the speed of light? That's basically the challenge Beijing was up against. Because in the world of semiconductors, the target, the cutting edge, it's not just moving, it's accelerating. And that's all thanks to Moore's Law, right? This relentless idea that computing power doubles every 18 months. You're not just in a race, you're in a race against time itself, and time is speeding up.
So what was their first answer to this massive challenge? Well, spoiler alert, it was a spectacular failure. For a whole decade, China's efforts were basically a masterclass in what not to do. Just one expensive misstep after another that, in the end, forced them to completely rethink their entire strategy. So what kicked off this whole costly journey in the first place?
So what was it that really lit a fire under them? You might think it was about economics, building consumer gadgets. But no, the real catalyst for China's big chip chase, it was a war. A war they watched from thousands of miles away that sent this massive shockwave all the way to Beijing.
Okay, to really get the impact of that war, you have to understand just how far behind China was at this point. It's 1990. The US, Japan, Taiwan, they're all racing ahead in the chip game. And China? They were a technological backwater, totally stalled out by decades of internal turmoil. The gap wasn't just a gap, you guys, it was a chasm. They weren't even in the same league.
And then came the moment that changed absolutely everything. In 1991, when the US-led coalition just dismantled the Iraqi military in Operation Desert Storm, Beijing was watching. And they didn't just see a war, they saw a terrifying tech demo. Precision-guided missiles, advanced electronic warfare, and they had this sudden chilling realization that all of it, every single piece of it, was powered by semiconductors. All of a sudden, chips weren't just for little radios anymore. They were the absolute bedrock of modern military power and really national survival.
So, reeling from this wake-up call, China launched its very first massive state-led push into chips. They called it Project 98, and this thing was supposed to be their great leap forward into the modern age. But instead, it became a legendary cautionary tale, defined by one single, absolutely fatal mistake.
The strategy they chose was pure top-down state control. It's what people call the command model. The idea was simple, right? The government makes every decision, allocates every single dollar, and basically tries to force an entire industry into existence by sheer will. The plan seems straightforward. Buy a whole production line from AT&T in the US, give it to a state-owned company, and, just watch the magic happen. Sounds easy enough. What could possibly go wrong?
Well, this is the fatal flaw. It's the core conflict of the whole project. You've got state bureaucracy, right? With all its competing ministries and just endless red tape. It moves at the speed of a glacier. But the semiconductor industry, driven by Moore's Law, moves like a rocket ship. So you've got one side that takes years, literally years, just to approve a plan, while the other side is completely reinventing itself every 18 months. It was a slow-motion train wreck just waiting to happen. So just how long was that delay? 7 years. Think about that. It took 7 full years just to get the project approved and the factory built. 7 years. In an industry where the top tech is old news in less than 2 years, a 7-year delay isn't just a setback. It's a death sentence. The project was dead before it even started. So by the time this factory finally opened its doors in 1997, its technology was practically ancient history. The result? A total, unmitigated disaster. It lost a staggering amount of money in its very first year, 240 million RMB. It couldn't attract any top talent, and it had zero ability to innovate. And the final humiliation, the real kicker, they had to lease out their brand new, totally obsolete equipment to companies from Taiwan just to try and stop the financial bleeding. Ouch. But despite being stung by this very public, very embarrassing failure, Beijing didn't just give up. They actually adapted. They learned. And this led them to Project 909, a second shot, basically born from the ashes of the first, but built on a completely different playbook.
And this time, the political will was just absolute. This quote you see here from the leadership really captures the mood, this mix of desperation and pure determination. We will smash our pots and sell our iron. It's a famous Chinese saying that basically means you're willing to sacrifice everything to get the job done. This time, failure was simply not an option. So what was the big strategic shift? Well, they had their aha moment. They finally realized the old command and control model was totally broken for this industry. So the new strategy was different. They kept the state funding, that was still key, but they added a brand new crucial ingredient, foreign expertise. Instead of trying to go it alone, they decided to find an expert partner to help them actually run the show.
And let me tell you, the difference was like night and day. Project 908 was that slow, bureaucratic state control model. Project 909, it was a fast-moving joint venture. With the first project, their partner, AT&T, was really just an equipment seller. But the new partner, the Japanese giant NEC, was a true operational partner, in the trenches with them. And the result? That crippling 7-year delay was gone, replaced by super-fast construction, and an obsolete factory was replaced with China's very first modern, large-scale chip manufacturing plant.
So, was Project 909 a success? Well, yes and no. It was what you'd call a qualified success. It absolutely got China in the game. They were finally manufacturing modern memory chips on a large scale. But here's the thing. Solving that first big problem only revealed another, much more subtle trap waiting for them. And this new challenge has a name. It's something that analysts later called the foundry trap. And it was this hidden weakness, this sneaky dependency that came baked right into their new joint venture model.
So what exactly is the foundry trap? Well, think of it like this. It's when you get really, really good at making things for other people, but you never learn how to invent or design anything yourself. You become a world-class factory following someone else's blueprints perfectly, but you don't own any of the valuable intellectual property, the designs, the patents. You get stuck doing the low-profit manufacturing work, while your partners, the ones with the brains, they get all the rewards from the actual innovation.
And this is exactly where China found itself. Their joint venture, called Huawei NEC, got great at churning out memory chips based on NEC's designs. But the core IP, the design knowledge, the real value, that all stayed with their Japanese partner. China learned how to follow the recipe perfectly, but they never learned how to actually write a new one themselves.
And that really brings us to the big lesson from this whole decade-long saga. It was, without a doubt, a very, very expensive education in how the modern tech industry really works. So if you look back, this whole decade forced this super rapid evolution in their thinking. Step 1 was the painful realization. Our old state-run model is just way too slow. Step 2 was the clever adaptation. Okay, let's try joint venture. It's faster and brings in expertise. But then came step 3, the new problem. This partnership model just makes us dependent on someone else, which led them to the big conclusion at the end of the 90s. We need a whole new approach, something even more dynamic, if we ever want to truly innovate on our own.
Well, throughout the 2000s, China's answer was this radical, kind of controversial plan. It was this multi-part strategy that was, honestly, as aggressive as it was ambitious. And this whole thing, this plan to basically reshape the global tech world, it all kicked off with a major shift in how they thought about the problem.
So here's where our story really begins, with this huge shift in strategy. See, after China joined the World Trade Organization in 2001, their whole approach changed. They moved away from the old school, top-down government projects and started focusing on creating this really attractive environment for anyone to come in and invest and innovate.
And the official playbook for this whole new era, it was something called State Council Document Number 18. Now, this thing was a total game changer. Why? Because it completely shifted the government's role. Instead of trying to bet on one or two specific companies, it basically created this whole menu of amazing incentives. The goal was simple. Make China the most attractive place on the planet for anyone, and I mean anyone, to design and build chips. All right, so the first and honestly most powerful tool in that playbook was something really controversial. It was basically a tax weapon, and it was designed to kickstart local growth no matter the cost. So, to get this, you have to know how things were. Back then, there was a standard 17% value-added tax, a VAT, on every single semiconductor sold in China. Didn't matter where it came from, the US, Japan, right there in Beijing. Everyone paid that same 17%. But then, Document 18 came along and just blew that all up. It rolled out this incredibly generous rebate system. And get this, for chip design companies based inside China, their tax rate suddenly dropped to just 3%. For the companies actually manufacturing the chips, it was only 6%. Just wow. So you can immediately see what this created, right? International competitors were screaming that this was a totally unfair, discriminatory system. And they had a point. All of a sudden, if you imported a chip, you were paying the full 17% tax.
But if you bought a domestic one, you were paying a tiny fraction of that. The strategy here was really smart in a way. First, give your brand new local startups a massive leg up. And second, put a ton of pressure on the big foreign companies to build their factories in China just to compete.
Well, as you could probably guess, the rest of the world did not take this sitting down. The backlash was immediate and pretty hostile. The US said, whoa, hold on, this violates a core rule of the WTO. You can't treat imported goods differently. In fact, the Bush administration filed the very first WTO dispute case ever against China over this. Now, China kind of knew they didn't have a leg to stand on, so they agreed to get rid of the rebates. But here's the kicker. Even though the policy was short-lived, it had already done its job. It was like this super potent fertilizer that gave hundreds of new Chinese chip design companies the startup cash they needed to get going.
Okay, so giving out tax breaks was a big deal, but it wasn't enough. That was just one piece of the puzzle. The second major part of China's strategy was to build a true national champion. A flagship company that could go toe-to-toe with the big guys on the world stage. And that company's name was SMIC, the Semiconductor Manufacturing International Corporation.
And really, at the heart of SMIC's story is its founder, a guy named Richard Chang. Now, this is important. He wasn't some government official. He was this super charismatic Taiwanese-American guy who was a veteran of Texas Instruments. He brought credibility, he brought real-world experience, and he brought a global perspective to the whole project.
And Chang's playbook for building this company from nothing, it was absolutely brilliant. First up, he started what you could call a reverse brain drain. He convinced hundreds of super experienced Taiwanese and Chinese American engineers to pack up and move to Shanghai. But then, how do you keep them there? Well, he built an entire community around the factory. We're talking private schools, nice housing, the whole deal. And then there was this really unique part. He created a company culture that was heavily influenced by his own devout Christian faith. It gave everyone this powerful sense of mission, which was huge for bringing this diverse team together.
But when you grow that fast, you make enemies. SMIC's incredible rise put it on a direct collision course with the biggest player in the game, Taiwan's TSMC. And in 2003, TSMC dropped the hammer, suing SMIC for stealing trade secrets. This kicked off a nasty, years-long legal war, and it did not end well for SMIC. In 2009, a California court ruled against them, leading to this devastating settlement that ultimately forced Richard Chang, the founder, to resign.
But here's the really important takeaway. Even with all that turmoil, the lawsuits, their founder being forced out, SMIC had still accomplished its main mission. It had successfully built China's first ever modern wafer fabs. The gigantic complex factories where chips are actually made. This was huge. It broke the country's complete reliance on foreign companies, and it gave all those new Chinese chip design startups a place to actually get their products manufactured.
So at the same time, China was pouring resources into building up its own champion, SMIC. They were also playing a completely different game in parallel. This was the third pillar of their strategy, using their gigantic market as bait to lure the world's biggest chip makers to come and build factories right there on Chinese soil.
This whole approach was known as the market for technology thesis, and the logic behind it was super simple, almost like a bargain. The pitch to global giants was basically this: we'll give you incredible deals, tax breaks, cheap land, you name it, and in return, you bring your advanced manufacturing tech over here and train our local engineers.
And two huge deals really show how this played out. First, in 2007, you had Intel building a factory in Dalian. For China, this was a massive diplomatic victory. But, and this is a big but, Intel only used its older, trailing-edge technology there. So it wasn't their latest and greatest stuff, which kind of limited how much tech was actually transferred. On the other hand, you had South Korea's SK Hynix. They built this enormous memory chip factory in Wuxi, and it wasn't an afterthought. It was a core part of their global operations using their current technology.
And the scale of that SK Hynix investment, it's just staggering. By the middle of the 2010s, that one single factory in Wuxi was pumping out something like half of the company's entire global supply of DRAM memory chips. For China, this was a home run. It cemented their place right in the middle of the global supply chain. But for South Korea, well, it created this deep, strategic dependency on China that, as we'll see, would become a huge problem later on.
Okay, so after a whole decade of these tax wars, building up national champions, and making these massive deals with foreign companies, where did that leave China's chip industry? Let's try and unpack the really complicated legacy of this foundational and, pretty flawed decade.
So what was the end result of this whole decade-long push? After all that effort, did the big gamble actually pay off? Well, the results were really a story of two sides. On the one hand, it was a huge success in some ways.
China managed to create a domestic fabless design industry, the companies that design chips but don't own the factories, from basically zero. It got its first modern fabs built, thanks to SMIC, and it trained a whole generation of engineers on world-class equipment. But, on the other hand, the country was still deeply, deeply dependent on foreign technology. And that created these really complex problems and vulnerabilities that would absolutely come back to bite them later. We're going back to a really critical window between 2010 and 2014. This was when China's leaders had a massive wake-up call about their own tech dreams, and it forced them into a pivot that, honestly, set the stage for everything that's happened since. Just let that sink in for a minute. We're talking about China, this absolute manufacturing powerhouse, and the tiny silicon chips that power our electronics had become more valuable to import than all the oil needed to fuel its entire massive economy. That is wild. This wasn't just some boring statistic. It was a blaring 5-alarm fire bell going off in the highest levels of government.
As you can probably guess, a chasm like that doesn't stay an economic issue for long. It morphed, and it morphed fast, into a huge strategic vulnerability. This wasn't about trade balances anymore. It became a full-blown rallying cry for folks in Beijing who saw this dependency as a serious threat to national security.
So the big question is, what was the plan to fix it? Well, the strategy they had, which was basically a leftover from the 2000s, just wasn't cutting it. It became painfully obvious that the old incentives had hit a wall. So the old playbook, known as Document 18, was all about passive stuff, like tax breaks and subsidies. But by 2010, the assessment was pretty brutal. It was insufficient and way too fragmented. The money was being sprinkled around to all these different local governments without a clear focus. And to make things even worse, one of their main financial tools, a kind of tax rebate that was running into trouble with world trade rules, was about to expire. They were losing one of their biggest policy levers. And man, the failure really comes into focus when you put the goal next to the reality. The dream? A world-class, totally self-sufficient chip industry. The reality on the ground? A bunch of small, redundant little factories that couldn't compete, all making the same low-tech stuff. This approach was absolutely not creating the global champions they needed. Okay, so faced with that reality, Beijing knew they had to change course, and fast. This moment of crisis led to that first major pivot we're talking about, a brand new strategy that was way more aggressive and all about the money. The new plan arrived in 2011, and it was called Document Number 4. This was the official replacement for that old, failing policy. Its message was crystal clear. The era of passive, scattered incentives was over. It was time to get aggressive and really focus on capital. So what did this new, aggressive strategy actually look like? Well, they kept some of the old tools, like tax exemptions, but they basically put them on steroids. For example, a new rule gave certain companies 2 years completely tax-free, then 3 more years where they only paid half. But the biggest change, the real philosophical shift, was this move to a capital-centric approach. The new game plan was simple: inject massive amounts of state-guided money into the industry.
But you have to ask, right? Was a flood of cash really the silver bullet they were looking for? Well, as it turns out, even this super aggressive new strategy slammed headfirst into a much deeper, much more stubborn problem: the dependency dilemma.
Now, this part is super important. The new policy wasn't a total failure. It led to something analysts call strategic drift. The part of the industry that designs chips but doesn't make them, think of companies like Huawei's HiSilicon, they actually did great. They grew like crazy. But the really hard part, the part that matters most, actually manufacturing the advanced chips, that part just stagnated compared to the rest of the world.
So why the stagnation in manufacturing? Well, because the old model had totally failed to build up a domestic supply chain for the incredibly complex machines you need to make chips. The real choke point was the tools themselves. China was still almost completely dependent on a small handful of foreign companies. We're talking ASML in the Netherlands, Applied Materials in the US, Tokyo Electron in Japan. These guys held the keys to the kingdom. You can design the most advanced chip in the world, but if you can't buy the tools to actually build the factory, you're still stuck.
The old playbook was pretty simple. Just sprinkle money around, scattered subsidies here, a few tax breaks there. The problem? Building a modern chip factory costs billions of dollars. So these small handouts, it was like trying to fill an ocean with a water pistol. It became crystal clear this scattered approach was failing, and they needed a radical change.
And that change came in 2014. It really marked a whole new era. China shifted from just handing out grants to a much more aggressive, much more sophisticated model: state-directed capitalism.
And this pivot was fast. I mean, really fast. In June of 2014, the government drops these new guidelines with an incredibly bold goal: become a world leader in chips by 2030. Then, just 3 months later, they create the tool to make it happen: a massive national investment fund designed to finally solve the industry's biggest headache, a serious lack of capital.
And this was the big fund. Now, the key difference was its structure. This wasn't just another subsidy program handing out free money. Nope, it was set up to act like a venture capital firm. It would take ownership stakes in companies, and it demanded a return on its investment. The idea was to force some market discipline on these companies and avoid the waste that comes with pure government handouts.
So you're probably wondering, where does a cool $22 billion come from? Well, it was a mobilization of the state's absolute biggest players. You had the Ministry of Finance and state-run banks, of course. But you also had these cash-rich state monopolies like China Tobacco and the telecom giant China Mobile pitching in. This was a true all-of-government, all-hands-on-deck effort.
All right, so they've got this mountain of cash. Now what? The fund had to make some really strategic choices. And where it decided to place its bets? Well, that tells you everything you need to know about its game plan to close that technology gap. If you look at how they sliced up the pie, one thing just jumps right out at you. A massive 67%, 2/3 of the entire fund went directly into wafer fabrication. That's the incredibly complex, insanely expensive process of actually manufacturing the chips. This was the biggest bottleneck, and China was determined to fix it. The rest of the money was spread strategically across design, packaging, and critical equipment. And we're not just talking about abstract sectors here. This money flowed to specific, hand-picked national champions. In manufacturing, billions went to companies like SMIC and Huawei. In packaging, a key recipient was ZTE. And in the super important equipment sector, companies like AMEC and Nora got funds to try and break the foreign monopoly on chip-making tool. All right, so we've seen the strategy. But here's the $22 billion question. Did it actually work? Let's take a look at the real-world results of these huge investments, from buying up competitors to sparking some genuine homegrown innovation. Let's start with the case of ZTE. It's a perfect example. The big fund invests heavily. And what does ZTE do with the cash? It turns around and acquires a major Singaporean competitor, Stats Chip Pack. Just like that. In a single move, this company went from being a local player to a top-tier global provider. It got immediate access to tech that would have taken years and years to develop on its own. But it wasn't just about buying up companies. The fund also zeroed in on a really strategic battleground: memory chips. Now, why memory? Well, think about it. Things like the DRAM in your computer or the NAND flash in your phone are pretty standardized commodities. The thinking was that sheer scale and capital, which China now had in spades, could overcome the technology barriers. Plus, these chips made up a gigantic part of China's import bill. And this focus led to one of the era's coolest technical achievements. A new company, created with big fund backing, called YMTC, came up with this novel architecture they called X-stacking. It was so clever. Instead of building a chip layer by painstaking layer, they built the memory parts and the logic parts on two completely separate wafers, and then just bonded them together. It was a brilliant workaround to some really tough manufacturing challenges. And the impact? It was undeniable. YMTC started cranking out more and more advanced 3D NAND chips, and the results were just staggering. This quote says it all. The progress was so fast, it alarmed competitors in the US and Korea. This wasn't just about market share, this was a geopolitical shockwave. For the first time, rivals who had always dismissed China's efforts as permanently lagging behind were actually genuinely worried. But here's the thing. The big fund's direct investment? That was only part of the story. Its real secret weapon was its ability to act as a force multiplier, pulling in way more money into the sector. So let's start with the base number. Phase 1 of the big fund raised just under 139 billion RMB. That's about 22 billion US dollars. And on its own, that is a huge war chest for any industry. But that's not the whole story. Now get this. That initial state investment is estimated to have mobilized over 500 billion RMB in total funding from across society. That's more than triple the original amount. So how on earth did they pull that off? Well, the mechanism was actually pretty simple, but incredibly powerful. An investment from the big fund was basically a giant seal of state approval. It was a signal to local governments, to private investors, to everybody, that a company was a strategic priority and a safe bet. This took a lot of the risk out of the sector, which encouraged a flood of additional cash to follow the big fund's lead.
multiplying its impact over and over again.
Okay, so in 2015, the world gets introduced to this thing called Made in China 2025. And let's be clear, this wasn't just another 5-year economic plan. Oh no, this was a full-blown strategy to become a superpower in 10 key high-tech industries. And what was the one technology at the absolute heart of all 10 of them? You guessed it, semiconductor.
Now, what really made people sit up and take notice was that, unlike older plans, this one had really explicit hard targets. And they sent like actual shockwaves through the industry. The goal was to get to 40% domestic content by 2020, which, as we just saw, didn't happen, and then an even more staggering 70% by 2025. So, how did the rest of the world react? Well, not well. The reaction was fast and it was really negative. Other countries looked at these targets and basically saw a mandate for import substitution that violated the spirit of open trade. In other words, they saw a plan to use government money to push foreign companies out and replace them with Chinese ones.
And this, right here, is where everything changes. This was a critical pivot point. The US government, especially, started to look at China's chip ambitions and see something very different. It wasn't just business competition anymore. Now, it was seen as a dual-use security threat. The big fear was that all these advanced chips wouldn't just go into phones, they'd go into powering China's military and its intelligence agencies. So that huge shift in perspective, it completely set the stage for the next chapter of this story. This is the part where China's dependence on the rest of the world for technology wasn't just a weakness. It was about to be turned into a weapon and used against them. And it was all going to happen in a very public and very painful way. What happened next were two events that you could only describe as Sputnik moments for Beijing. I mean, these were brutal, shocking wake-up calls. First in 2018, bam, the US bans American companies from selling to the huge telecom company ZTE. And since ZTE relied on US chips, the company basically collapsed overnight. Then, just a year later, it happened again, but this time to an even bigger fish, Huawei. The lesson from that ZTE crisis was just seared into the minds of China's leaders. It hammered home a terrifying point. Depending on American technology wasn't just a business risk anymore, it was an existential threat. A foreign government could literally kill one of your biggest, most important companies with nothing more than the stroke of a pen. But the Huawei crisis taught another, even deeper lesson. See, Huawei was smart. They had actually seen something like this coming and had designed their own backup chips, a spare tire just in case. But, and this is the huge but, they couldn't actually make them. They had to rely on factories like TSMC in Taiwan to build them. And those factories, they relied on critical American equipment to do it. So the lesson was crystal clear. Being able to design the world's best chips is completely useless if you don't have the ability to actually manufacture them yourself. So, getting hit with these two crises back to back, it forced this incredibly dramatic pivot. This was it, the end of one era and the beginning of a brand new and much, much more urgent one, the era of self-reliance. That whole catch-up era, the one built on global cooperation, it was over. Done. It was replaced by something people have started calling an era of siege. It's a new period that's defined by one single, all-consuming goal: achieve total technological self-reliance. And it doesn't matter what it costs. So this new era is completely guided by the really harsh lessons they just learned. The big takeaways were pretty simple, really. First, globalization is a double-edged sword. Second, technology can and will be weaponized. Third, chip independence isn't just about the economy anymore. It is a core national security issue. And maybe the biggest lesson of all, manufacturing, owning the factories, that's the final frontier. That's the ultimate prize.
We're going to dig into China's fortress strategy, a massive multi-billion-dollar response to a technological shock that pretty much threatened to cripple its most critical industry, semiconductors.
So, imagine this. How do you survive a tech blockade? Well, back in 2019, this wasn't just some thought experiment for China's tech giants. It was a sudden, harsh reality. The United States put Huawei, basically the crown jewel of China's high-tech economy, on an export blacklist. And that cut it off from all the essential American technology it absolutely depended.
Okay, so here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll look at the catalyst, that moment of clarity. Then, we'll dive into Huawei's private rescue mission, followed by the state's heavy artillery. After that, we'll see how they're cultivating these little giants. And finally, we'll pull it all together to understand the fortress strategy. All right, let's get into it.
Right, so it all kicks off with this one single event that served as a massive, and I mean massive, wake-up call for China's policymakers. It forced them into an immediate and really decisive mobilization. And things moved fast in 2019. Look at this timeline. What's kind of crazy is that Huawei actually created its investment arm in April, just a few weeks before the US sanctions hit in May. Talk about foresight, right? Then, bam, the sanctions land, and you see this immediate strategic mobilization of cash from both the private sector and the state.
And here is the crucial takeaway, the real heart of the issue. The sanctions expose this deep, deep vulnerability. What it really means is that even China's biggest, most advanced tech companies were basically giants standing on a foundation they didn't actually own. It was a foundation of Western IP that was suddenly and violently being pulled out from under them.
So you might think the first big move came from the government, right? Nope. The first responder was actually the company at the dead center of the storm, Huawei itself.
So what did they do? They created their own investment arm, Hubble Investment. And you gotta understand, this wasn't some slow-moving bureaucratic state fund. Hubble acted like a private, agile special ops team. It had one mission and one mission only: make sure Huawei survives, period. And their strategy was just brilliant and incredibly surgical. Step 1, they mapped out their entire supply chain to figure out, okay, what are all the critical American parts we can't get anymore? Step 2, they found or funded Chinese startups that could even try to make those parts. And this is the most important part. Step 3, Huawei promised to buy whatever these little companies made. That completely de-risked the whole thing for them. It created a guaranteed, built-in market.
Now, what's really fascinating is if you look at what Hubble was investing in, this wasn't about finding the next big thing. It was a direct mirror image of Huawei's own supply chain weaknesses. They were pouring money into really specific, kind of unsexy areas like optoelectronics and specialized materials, the stuff that was totally dominated by foreign firms. This wasn't venture capital. This was pure strategic survival. Okay, so while Huawei's special ops team is out there fighting for its life, the state is getting ready to roll out the big guns. Let's talk about the heavy artillery. And when I say heavy artillery, I mean it. The state mobilized what they called the Big Fund 2 and armed it with over 200 billion RMB. Now that's about 29 billion US dollars. Just a massive war chest designed to completely overhaul the entire national industry.
But here's the thing, it wasn't just about the size of the fund. The real story is what they were going to spend it on. You see, the first big fund, which ran up to 2019, threw almost all of its cash, like 2/3 of it, into just building the factories, the fabs. And that created a huge problem.
Yeah, that old strategy basically created these incredible, advanced factories that were little more than hollow shells. Why? Because they were filled to the brim with super sophisticated American and Japanese tools. So if sanctions suddenly cut off access to those tools, or even just the spare parts for them, these multi-billion-dollar factories would become totally useless. Big Fund 2 was designed to fix that specific problem.
And this slide just lays it out perfectly. You've got these two very different but totally complementary strategies running at the same time. On one side, you have Huawei's Hubble Fund, acting like a surgeon to ensure its own corporate survival. And on the other, you have the state's Big Fund 2, building the deep, foundational strength for long-term national resilience. It's like one was fighting for today while the other was building for tomorrow. Really smart.
But it didn't stop there. The strategy went even deeper than just funding the big national champions and plugging the obvious holes. They also knew they had to build the industry from the ground up.
So at the same time, the government started cultivating what it calls little giants. Now these aren't your big household names. They're smaller, super specialized companies that own critical pieces of intellectual property in really tiny niche parts of the supply chain. You can think of them as the hidden foundation of the whole thing. And what do these companies make? Well, it's the essential, often invisible stuff that a massive factory just can't function without. We're talking about things like ultra-pure gases, specialized solvents, tiny valves and pumps. By giving these little guys tax breaks and government contracts, Beijing was trying to create a really deep and resilient domestic supply chain right from the grassroots. Okay, so let's zoom out. What's the big picture here? What is all of this? Huawei's quick response, the state's big money, the little guys, what does it all add up to? Well, it's all part of a huge, multi-layered national project with one single overarching goal. And that goal is to build a technological fortress. By combining that private sector agility from Huawei, the insane financial power of the state, and that grassroots support for the little giants, the whole point is to build a self-reliant domestic industry. One that's insulated from what experts call weaponized interdependence, which is basically just a fancy way of saying a country can't use its control over the global supply chain to pressure you anymore.
And this quote right here, it just nails it. We're not talking about some broad trade war anymore. This became a kind of technological trench warfare, with both sides digging in and fighting over very specific, very critical points in the global supply chain.
So, what was the US response? Well, they started building this massive wall, a comprehensive export control regime. And look, the goal here wasn't just to, slow China down. The idea was to put up strategic roadblocks at the most critical points in the chip-making process, aiming to stop China's advance dead in its tracks.
Okay, so how did this new phase of the chip war actually play out? To really get the strategy, first, we've got to understand the battlefield itself, because this battlefield, it's all about a few critical vulnerabilities.
And the key concept here, the word you need to know, is choke point. I want you to imagine a narrow pass in a supply chain. This one piece of tech that's so critical and so hard to copy that if you control it, bam, you can basically paralyze an entire industry. The US strategy was built entirely around finding and controlling these choke points. And it really boiled down to two primary targets. First, the hardware, these unbelievably complex lithography machines that literally print the circuits onto silicon. And second, the software, the electronic design automation, or EDA tools, that are used to design the circuits in the first place. Think about it. If you control the printing press and the design software, you pretty much control the future of chips, right?
All right, let's dive into the first one, the hardware blockade. This is all about the battle for lithography, and it centers on these massive, mind-bogglingly complex machines that are the beating heart of every modern chip factory.
Okay, so what is lithography exactly? The simplest way to think about it is like a super advanced kind of photography. It uses light to project and etch microscopic circuit patterns onto silicon wafers. The more precise you can make that pattern, the more powerful the chip becomes. Honestly, this process is arguably the single biggest choke point in the entire industry, full stop.
And this is where you see the absolutely massive gap in technology. Now, when you hear people talking about chips, they use terms like nanometer or NM. Just remember, the smaller the number, the more powerful the chip. It's that simple. On one side, you've got the Dutch company ASML. Their top-of-the-line EUV machines are the only ones on the planet that can make the most advanced 5-nanometer chips. And on the other side, China's champion, SMIC, was stuck way back, making machines for 90-nanometer chips. I mean, we're talking generations behind.
But here's the twist. See, China didn't go for the cutting-edge 5-nanometer stuff. No, their number one priority was 28 nanometers. So why? Because the 28-nanometer node is what you'd call the industrial sweet spot. It's not for the latest iPhone, but it is perfect for everything else. Cars, TVs, washing machines, factory equipment. This wasn't about winning the tech race. This was about survival. It was about making sure their entire industrial economy could keep running.
And this is where you really see their strategy in action. China flooded SME with money, but they focused on an older, more achievable technology called DUV. They built a new machine and used this really clever technique called multi-patterning. The easiest way to picture it is like using a stencil, but you use it over and over again, shifting it just a tiny bit each time to create a much more detailed design. It's a really clever workaround that let them hit that crucial 28-nanometer target with older tech. A huge breakthrough for them. Okay, so that's the hardware. Let's switch gears now and talk about the other side of this fight, the software squeeze. We're moving away from the factory floor and onto the digital drawing board, which is where the life of every single microchip begins.
We're talking about something called electronic design automation, or EDA. So if lithography is the physical printing press, EDA software is, well, it's everything else. It's the blueprint, the design tool, the spell checker, all rolled into one. You literally cannot make a modern chip without it. It is absolutely essential.
And right here, we find that second huge choke point. The entire global market for this essential software is basically run by just 3 companies, all with deep roots in the US. This gave the US an incredibly powerful lever, and in August 2022, they pulled it, restricting exports of the most advanced EDA software to China. But here's the thing, Beijing saw this coming. They started building what you could call a software shield, and they did it by picking one domestic company, Emperor Technology, and pouring resources into it.
This once small player became a state-backed national champion, even raising a ton of cash in a huge IPO. So by the time the US finally added Emperor to its blacklist, the company could basically say, yeah, we can handle this. It was a clear sign that all that preparation was actually working.
Okay, so this all brings us to China's big picture response. Faced with these blockades, instead of just plugging a few holes, Beijing launched this massive whole chain strategy. The goal? To build a complete domestic fortress, a semiconductor ecosystem that didn't need anyone else.
And this strategy really has three key parts. First, they just injected a staggering amount of cash through state funds like the Big Fund. Second, they picked their national champions like SME for the hardware and Emperor for the software and propped them up. And third, and this might be the most interesting part, they started fortifying the entire supply chain by funding all these smaller specialized companies they call little giants.
And these little giants are absolutely fascinating. We're not talking about household names here. These are companies that make the obscure but totally vital stuff. You've got Piotech, which got funding to replace the American equipment needed for memory chips. Hubei Jing'eri got money to produce the super pure specialty gases you need. And RS Laser was funded to make the specific lasers that go inside SME's lithography machines. What China was doing was systematically going down the list and funding every single supplier they needed. They were building a state-backed, vertically integrated machine from the ground up.
So after all this, what's the result of this incredibly high-stakes fight? Well, it's basically shoved the whole world into a brand new reality, what we're calling an era of sovereignty. And in this new era, the old rules of, global trade and economic efficiency, they're getting thrown out the window. And independence, well, it comes at a very, very steep price.
Just look at this number for a second. It's estimated that using that older DUV multi-patterning trick to make more advanced chips costs a whopping 40 to 50% more than just using ASML's top-of-the-line machines. It's way less efficient, you end up with more faulty chips, it's just worse from a purely economic standpoint.
And that right there, that is the absolute key takeaway from this whole thing. For Beijing, the priorities have completely flipped. Economic efficiency has taken a back seat to national capability. The government is totally willing to pay for these massive extra costs just to make sure they can keep the factories running, with or without foreign technology.
And that is the sovereignty era. It's a whole new paradigm for the world, where the number one goal is strategic self-sufficiency in critical technologies. Countries are now looking at this and saying, you know what, we're willing to pay more, we're willing to be less efficient if it means we can control our own technological destiny and secure our nation.
So the chip war, it has entered a brand new phase. For a long time, the story was all about the US trying to slow down China's tech ambitions. But in 2024, that's changing. China isn't just playing defense anymore. They're on the attack with a really calculated, really aggressive counteroffensive. So how are they pulling it off? Let's dive in. So the big question on everyone's mind is, how exactly is China fighting back? This isn't just about trying to catch up. We're talking about a multi-layered plan that involves a ton of capital, a whole lot of economic pressure, and a super secretive push for total technological independence. And it all starts with the money. And when I say money, I mean a truly staggering amount of it. This financial firepower is being channeled through something called Big Fund 3, and honestly, it's the engine that's powering this entire counteroffensive. We are talking about $47.5 billion US. That's the registered capital for the third phase of China's National Chip Investment Fund, which was just set up in May of 2024. And just to put that number in perspective, it is way larger than the first two funds combined. But you know what? That giant number isn't even the most interesting part of the story. The real story, the real game-changing move here is hidden in the structure. It's not just about how much money they have, it's about who is providing it, and that signals a massive shift in China's entire national strategy. Okay, so here's the key difference. The first two funds were mostly backed by the government's finance ministry. Big Fund 3, though, this is different. It's being funded directly by China's largest state-owned commercial banks. We're talking giants like ICBC and China Construction Bank. This move basically aligns the entire financial might of the Chinese banking system with its tech hardware goals. And this has created what some are now calling a whole nation financial system. So what does that actually mean? It means building their own chips is no longer just some industrial policy goal. It's now a core systemic priority for the entire nation's financial apparatus. Credit lines, investments, state guidance, it's all fused together for this one single goal. The implications here are just huge. This structure unleashes what's called patient capital, money that can be invested for 10, even 15 years without needing a quick return. That allows them to fund these wild, high-risk moonshot projects that a typical venture capitalist would never even consider. Plus, after some big corruption scandals back in 2022, the fund's leadership is now much more professional and centralized, making sure every single dollar is aimed squarely at national security goals. Okay, so China's got this massive war chest. How are they deploying it? Well, the first part of their counterattack is what we can call the legacy chip gambit. It's a plan to weaponize older but absolutely critical semiconductor technology. While everyone's attention is on the latest and greatest AI chips, a huge piece of China's strategy is aimed right here, at the 28 nanometer and older chips. Now, don't let the word older fool you. These are the workhorses of the global economy. They power everything from your car to medical equipment to the entire Internet of Things. And their ambition here is just massive. Projections show that by 2027, China is aiming to control up to 40% of the entire global capacity for these legacy chips. I mean, just stop and think about the economic leverage that kind of market share gives you. So how do they plan to do it? It's a strategy some have called the weaponization of dual circulation. And it works like this. First, Big Fund 3 pours a ton of subsidies into domestic production. This lets Chinese factories flood the global market with cheap chips, which drives prices way down. Soon, Western competitors just can't make a profit anymore. And the end result? China gains dominant, basically uncontested control of the market. And this really is the end game. The goal is to gain a coercive lever, a chokehold over the global economy that some analysts are comparing to OPEC's control over oil. When one country controls the chips that run the world's most essential industries, it holds an incredible amount of power. So, while China is pushing its power outward with legacy chips, it's also building a fortress right at home. And that brings us to the second pillar of its strategy, the Delete A initiative. Delete A is pretty much what it sounds like, a formal government policy to delete America. It mandates that critical industries in China must systematically rip out foreign technology, especially processors, and replace it all with homegrown alternatives. This is all about building a self-sufficient tech ecosystem that's totally insulated from foreign pressure. And this isn't some vague, far-off plan. The policy was made official this year, in 2024, and it comes with a hard deadline, 2027. By then, major sectors like telecom and finance have to complete the phase-out. That's a ticking clock, and it's creating a massive sense of urgency across China's entire tech industry. The effect of this is pretty simple. It creates a huge, protected, guaranteed domestic market. This ensures that China's own national champions, companies like Huawei with their Kompang and Ascend server chips, have a massive, built-in customer base safe from any international competition or sanctions. Now, that protected home market is absolutely crucial for the third and, frankly, the most audacious pillar of China's strategy. This is their high-risk, high-reward plan to get to advanced chip manufacturing completely on their own terms. And people have started calling it the dark matter supply chain. So what is it? Well, you can think of it as this shadowy network of factories and equipment suppliers, reportedly architected by Huawei, that operates deep in the shadows. Its entire reason for being is to build a sanctions-proof ecosystem, all quietly funded by Big Fund 3, to develop advanced chips far away from prying eyes. This table does a great job of explaining the trade-offs they're making. To get to 5-nanometer class chips without the most advanced EUV machines from the West, they have to use older DUV tools in a much more complicated, brute force way. As you can see, it's about 50% more expensive and produces far fewer usable chips. The yields are much lower than TSMC's methods. But, and this is the key, look at that bottom line. For China, the strategic value of having a sovereign, sanction-proof capability is, well, it's priceless. And that's really the heart of it. Commercially, this process is a disaster. It's incredibly inefficient. But inside that whole nation system we've been talking about, where state capital just covers any and all losses, commercial metrics become completely irrelevant. They just don't matter. This quote really just nails the point. These advanced factories in China aren't operating like normal businesses. They are state strategic assets, sustained by what seems like unlimited capital to make sure China's champions get the advanced computing they need no matter what the cost per wafer is. To really get a sense of the scale here, you just have to follow the money. I mean, look at this number. In 2025 alone, China is on track to spend a mind-boggling $38 billion on chip-making equipment. Now, that's actually a little dip from 2024, but even so, China is still the #1 undisputed champion buyer of this stuff on the planet. This isn't just some budget line item, it is a massive statement of intent.
So why spend that much money? Well, it all boils down to this one really important idea, the sovereignty premium. This is the core logic driving the entire strategy. It basically means China is saying, you know what, we are willing to make less money, to be less efficient, if it means we get total control over our own tech supply chain. It's a straight-up trade. They're sacrificing short-term profit for long-term geopolitical power. Okay, so let's meet the companies that are actually on the ground, tasked with making this all happen. This whole offensive is really being fought on two major fronts: foundries, which are the factories that make chips for other companies, and memory, which is, of course, a critical component in everything from our phones to massive data centers.
Here they are, the 4 champions leading the charge. In the foundry world, you've got the giant SMIC and the specialist Huawei. And on the memory side, you've got CXMT, which is going after DRAM, that's the super fast memory in your computer, while YMT's focused on NAND flash for your long-term storage. Each one has a very specific job to do in this big coordinated push. Let's dig into what makes them tick.
First up is SMIC, and they're really the bellwether for the whole industry. As China's biggest chip maker, how they're doing tells you a lot. And what's fascinating is their utilization rate is over 92%. That's incredibly high, and it's being fueled by Chinese companies switching over to local suppliers. But here's the catch. All of this breakneck expansion means they have massive costs from all the new equipment, and that is putting a serious squeeze on their profits. Then you have Huawei, the #2 player, and they're playing a totally different game. They're trying to corner the market for specialty chips. Think power management, analog chips, that sort of thing. And this is a really clever move. Why? Well, because these kinds of chips don't need the absolute latest, most cutting-edge tools, which makes that whole sector way less vulnerable to US export controls. Pretty smart. But really, the most dramatic, explosive action is all happening in the memory sector. The expansion here is just happening at a blistering pace. Chinese companies are closing the production gap with the big Korean giants so fast that it's raising some serious alarm bells about a potential global glut of memory chips. Just look at CXMT, China's big DRAM champion. Its strategy is pure, unadulterated hyperscaling. Projections for 2025 show a 68% year-over-year jump in output. I mean, that's just insane. They are flooding the market with older chips while also ramping up the more advanced stuff, even the high bandwidth memory that's so crucial for AI. And the impact? It's undeniable. For the longest time, the global DRAM market has been a 3-horse race: Samsung, SK Hynix, and Micron. That's it. But now, analysts are predicting that by late 2025, CXMT could snatch nearly 12% of that entire market. This isn't some far-off threat. This is a major structural shift happening right now in real time. And then there's YMTC, the NAND flash memory maker. And their story is really one of incredible resilience. I mean, this company was put on the US Entity List, which is supposed to cut it off from American tech. But somehow, it's managed to keep pushing forward by swapping in domestic equipment. It's now even moving into the high-profit enterprise storage market, and its global revenue share is getting close to double digits. But look, a plan this huge, this ambitious, it's also packed with enormous risks. The amount of money being spent is staggering, but whether that money is being spent efficiently is a huge question mark. Let's talk about some of the inescapable hurdles that are on China's path here. Okay, so the biggest economic risk is something called the foundational trap. And it's a real paradox. So part of China's strategy is to flood the world with these less advanced, mature node chips. But if they do that, and they create this massive global oversupply, prices and profit margins are going to crash for everybody. And that could actually destroy the very profits they need to fund all the expensive R&D for the next generation of chips. So their success in one area could literally sabotage their ultimate goal. And hey, this isn't just a theory. China has already grabbed 33% of the global market for these mature chips. That level of dominance is setting the stage for what some call a red ocean scenario. Basically, a brutal price war that just slashes profits for the entire industry, including China's own companies. And then there's a really practical, on-the-ground problem: the equipment substitution lag. Even when you pour billions into domestic tool makers, there's a delay.
It just takes a really long time to build, install, and then perfect these incredibly complex machines for mass production. And that lag holds back their yield rates, which is the percentage of good chips they get off each wafer, and that slows the whole project down. So when you zoom out from all the factories and the financials, what does this all mean for the rest of us? Well, it means we are watching, in real time, the creation of two separate and diverging tech ecosystems. A great tech divide is opening up right before our eyes. You really have two different worlds forming. On one side, you have the traditional global ecosystem we've all lived in, built on these interconnected supply chains where commercial efficiency is everything. But on the other side, you have this emerging Internet of Chips in China, a system that's becoming more and more self-contained, where the number one priority isn't efficiency, but national security and certainty of supply. Okay, so something really big is happening right now. We're witnessing this fundamental, almost seismic shift in the global technology landscape. And look, this isn't just some temporary dispute. We're talking about a permanent rewiring of how technology is made and who controls it. And it's all being driven by China's incredibly ambitious strategy for semiconductor sovereignty. Let's break down what's really going on here. Some are even calling this, and I quote, the definitive death of globalization in the technology sector. I mean, that's a powerful statement, and it really sets the stage. The whole idea of a single, integrated global tech supply chain, well, that's pretty much over. What started out as a trade dispute has completely morphed into a struggle for the physical infrastructure of our entire digital world. So, what's replacing that old world? Well, welcome to the sovereignty era. And this is a really profound change in thinking. For decades, the goal was simple, right? Make the best tech for the cheapest price, didn't matter where the parts came from. Now, the new goal is geopolitical survivability. Nations are seriously asking themselves, can we function if we're cut off? And they're restructuring their most critical industry to make absolutely sure the answer is yes. As you can imagine, a massive strategic pivot like this from China, well, it's sending some serious shockwaves through the region. And nowhere is that being felt more intensely than by its most technologically advanced neighbors, South Korea and Taiwan. They're both watching this with a deep, deep sense of anxiety. And what's really fascinating is that their fears, while different, are both, well, they're existential. For South Korea, it's a straight-up economic threat. They're worried China is going to use its massive state subsidies to just flood the market, turn the high-tech memory chip business into a low-margin commodity game, and basically crush the established players. But for Taiwan, the fear is much more strategic. You see, their defense has always partly relied on the fact that the whole world needs their advanced chips. But if China doesn't need them anymore, well, that defense gets a lot weaker. Let's look a little closer at South Korea's situation. This threat isn't just some abstract idea. It has names. We're talking about Chinese companies like YMTC and CXMT, and they're seen as direct challengers to giants like Samsung and SK Hynix. And, you know, they've seen this movie before. They remember exactly what happened with LCD panels about a decade ago. China came in, subsidized production like crazy, and basically commoditized the entire market, pushing competitors out. Seoul sees the exact same playbook being run again, but this time, it's in the absolutely critical memory sector. And then there's Taiwan. For them, the calculation is all about this idea of the silicon shield. It's a strategic belief that because the entire world, including China, depends so heavily on chips from its superstar company, TSMC, no country could possibly afford to disrupt the island. But here's the thing, that shield is eroding. China is successfully decoupling its critical infrastructure. We're talking its military, its industry, from Taiwan's most advanced chips. And they're doing it by building a good enough domestic supply chain. Because here's the crucial point. China doesn't need the world's absolute best chip to run a tank, it just needs its own chip. So how did we even get here? I mean, this wasn't an overnight decision. China's strategy has evolved really, really fast, going from just a defensive reaction to a full-blown mission for total technological resilience. You can pretty much sum up the trigger for this whole pivot in one phrase: the weaponization of interdependence. China basically had a wake-up call. It realized that relying on global supply chains wasn't just an economic reality, it was a huge strategic vulnerability that could be used against it. And its response has been to systematically, piece by piece, eliminate that vulnerability. You can see this evolution happening in these really clear stages. It all started around 2019 as this panicked scramble, just trying to secure the basics for survival. Then it got more sophisticated, maturing into a chokepoint strategy. a frantic engineering push to master the key technologies it was missing. And that brings us right up to today, the fortress economy phase. And here, the goal isn't just to survive anymore, it's to build a completely parallel technological universe. This brings us to where we are right now. China isn't just trying to patch up holes in its supply chain anymore. No, it's building an entirely new, self-contained system, basically from scratch. At the very heart of this fortress is a totally new goal. China's making a very conscious choice here to sacrifice pure economic efficiency for geopolitical survivability. It's basically accepting that it might not have access to the best tools from the West, and because of that, it's just going to build its own. So what does a fortress economy actually look like in the real world? Well, it's really defined by three key things. First, redundancy, making sure you have multiple domestic suppliers for everything, so there's no single point of failure. Second, massive state-directed capital. And third, a really clever strategy of weaponizing older, so-called legacy chip manufacturing. Let's break those pillars down a little. Redundancy, that's pretty self-explanatory. State-directed capital, we're talking about pouring unbelievable sums of government money, like the recent Big Fund 3, directly into plugging specific technological gaps. And you've really got to pay attention to this third pillar, weaponizing legacy capacity. This is a brilliant strategic move to completely dominate the production of older, less advanced chips. You know, the kind that don't power supercomputers, but they do power literally everything in the physical world, from cars and factory equipment to all your home appliances. The implication of all of this is it's just profound. We are literally watching the descent of a silicon curtain. And this isn't some temporary trade barrier that's going to go away. This is a new, absolute, and most likely permanent division in the global tech landscape. So, what's the ultimate outcome of all this? Well, it's a permanently fractured global tech industry, one that's operating in two totally distinct spheres. To put it as bluntly as possible, the world that we all knew with one integrated supply chain is gone. It's being replaced by two separate, decoupling spheres of influence, and each one has different rules, different goals, and different technologies. So this divide creates two just fundamentally different approaches. The US-led alliance, well, it's focused on the bleeding edge, the smallest, the fastest, the most efficient transistors. Its leverage is its monopoly on this cutting-edge tech. The China-led fortress, on the other hand, has a totally different goal, sufficiency and sovereignty. Its focus on the industrial mid-range, and its leverage comes from aiming to become absolutely indispensable for the chips that run our physical world. So here's the crucial takeaway. China's endgame might not actually be to win the race for the smallest transistor. Instead, it seems to be building the capacity to be the world's indispensable factory for all those foundational chips that everything else relies on. And that creates a powerful new form of leverage in the global competition that's coming.
And that brings us to our final thought for today. As China successfully builds out this parallel technological universe, and as this silicon curtain becomes more and more absolute, it raises a really fundamental question for the future of tech, of economics, and global stability. What happens when we can no longer cross between them? That's what we'll all be watching. Thanks for joining this explainer.